Hi guys, welcome to part 3 of how to build a chatbot using Angular, Node.js, and Dialogflow video series. This video is going to be about how to set up the backend server using Node.js and Express.js. We first need to set up the backend server because it allows us to communicate with Dialogflow and relay Dialogflow's messages back to the front end. So it kind of acts like the middleman between the front end and Dialogflow, if that helps you visualize what it does. So if you don't already have a starter backend application created, you can do so by going to your coding editor, clicking on the folder where you want to create a folder, click on new folder, uh, name it backend, and then inside the backend, create, uh, run a terminal instance in that backend folder. And in that terminal instance, run the command npm init to create a package.json file. So once this package.json file has been created, we can add some dependencies that are needed by this project. To get the list of dependencies, please go on to my blog and grab this command, uh, which states all the dependencies needed for the backend. Just copy that and then paste it and run this command in order to save all the dependencies and install them. Notice because of the save flag, all the dependencies will be added to the package.json file as well, which I think would be the best case. So once that's been done, we can move on to the package.json's main entry point, which in this case is indicated to be index.js. So since index.js is the entry point, we now have to create that file. We can do that by right-clicking on backend, clicking new file, and then naming a file called index.js in order to create it. Inside this file, we need to add some application logic to set up our Express server. To do that, we start out by requiring Express first. Now, Express. We'll also need body parser. So Express is the web application framework used for our Node.js application, and body parser is used to parse incoming request bodies in a middleware before it reaches our backend handlers. Then we'll need session, express session, and express session is a library used for creating session middleware. Then we'll need cores, and cores is a library used as middleware that can be used to enable cores with various options so that we don't run into cores errors. And then we import error handler. Error handler is an error handler middleware that is suitable only for development environments. So since this application only concerns development, it's fine for now. Then we're going to import a index file contained in the, actually, we won't be needing an index file here. Next, we need to have a variable that processes if the node environment is in production or not. So if the node environment is production, assign it the production text. If not, the app will default to development environment. Next, we instantiate Express. We set up the application to use the cores middleware. Then we use require Morgan. And over here we need dev. And the Morgan library is a HTTP request logger middleware for Node.js, in case you're wondering. Then we use body parser and we say URL encoded, extended, false, use body parser.json. So again, body parser is used to parse incoming request bodies in a middleware before it reaches our backend handlers. And it's saying use JSON. Then we're using method override. So method override is a library that lets you use HTTP verbs such as put or delete in places where the client does not actually support it. So it's a kind of helper middleware. Then we use express static to specify the folder from where Express can grab static assets. In this case, it's going to be the public folder, which hasn't been created in this application, which is okay since we already have a front end and we don't need to serve static assets from our backend for now. Next, we're going to set up our session middleware. We specify a secret and a cookie. Give it a max age of 60,000 seconds. Resave equals false. Save uninitialized, false. Okay, so now we check if the is production variable is true. If not, we're going to use the development error handler, which is named error handler. And then we set up a route called API. Then we use dialogflow index to assign it to API so that any route, any request going to the API route goes into this controller file. Then we set up a production error handler. Saying next result status. So an error handler is used to handle errors. Basically, if a route that is not known by the application is requested by someone, the error handler is triggered, and the error handler in most cases shows a error page. In this case, we're going to show the error message itself. And finally, we're going to instantiate our server and start it up by calling app listen port process env node env port 3000. So if a port is not defined, default to port 3000, and then console log listening on port server address port. Okay, so now we've set up our Express server. Now we can move on to the index file over here, but we are missing something. So what we're missing is dialogflow index, and we need to import this, which is contained in our routes folder, API, and a routes folder API. Will automatically use the index file over here to set up this and right, so over here we need a semicolon and a comma here, and there we go. So our main index file is done. So now let's move on to our API index file. And by the way, so once you're done your index.js file, you need to create a routes folder. Inside that folder, you need to create another API folder. And then inside that API folder, you need to create two files, one called index.js and then the other called dialogflow.js. So we're going to start out by coding out the index.js file. And to do that, and this is the file that um, that sends requests to Dialogflow. So first we require express router, and we also require run intent. So this is contained in the dialogflow.js file. It's called run intent. It hasn't been defined yet, but we will define it very soon. Next, we're going to create a post route called request text. Okay, so any URL with the address, something server IP address, API request text, which is a post request, will hit this route. And once it's hit, we use an async await call. We use an arrow function, and we await on the result sent by Dialogflow. Rect body project ID, while passing in the project ID to Dialogflow because that is required for authentication purposes. So basically we pass in the project ID and the request text obtained from the front end to the Dialogflow run intent method. This method processes the project ID and the request text, which is most likely a question, and then returns the result to the result variable, which is all done asynchronously. And now then we send the result in the following format. So response message, result, response, and then so that will be the response that Dialogflow has issued regarding the query. And then we have original query, which is result query. And then we have intent. So we get the intent from the result. And what an intent is it's a group of messages in Dialogflow. So anything to do with a question would be grouped as a question intent. Anything to do with a greeting such as hi, hello, how are you, those types of queries will be grouped as a greeting intent. And then anything as a goodbye intent will be grouped as a bye intent. So they're basically groups of text queries. And then finally we have to export this function. Now finally we can focus on the Dialogflow logic. So this is the main logic that's going to send our request text and our project ID to Dialogflow so that we can get an response from Dialogflow. So we configure Dialogflow. So we import Dialogflow from Google Cloud Library. Then we use a UUID, which is a unique identifier. Then we import session. We get a session ID from that UID using the we_for method. Then we declare an async function called runIntent, which takes in a project ID along with a request text variable containing the text question that is asked by the client. Next, we code dialogflow sessions client, and then we do session path, session client, project agent, session path, and inside this session path we are required to pass in the project ID and the session ID. Then we need to declare an object called intent request, pass in the session path, state the query input, which is going to be in the following format. So the text is going to be the request text, and the language code is also required, which will be in English, United States English. And now we can move on to the response. So the response will be using the await call because this is done asynchronously. And we'll say session client detect intent request. And once the result is obtained, once the response is obtained, we're going to, which will be an array, we're going to use the first element of that array and get the query result field into the result variable. Then we're simply going to return an await object with the following parameters. So query containing the query text. So this is going to be the original query text. Next, we're going to send the response. So this is going to be the newly issued response sent by Dialogflow Conversational API. Next, we're going to send the intent as well. So this is the result.intent display name. So this is the intent category that the query falls into. And finally, we're going to export runIntent so that it can be used by our index.js file. Okay, so now that we've done coded out the Dialogflow function, this file basically has the runIntent function, and it requests information from Dialogflow. Once that is received from there, we get the response, save it into result, then we send it out to the front end via the res.send method. So that's all we have for the front end. And also, before I forget, we need to do one more thing to make our lives easier in terms of development for the backend. So you can already see I've installed nodemon. By default, it'll say Node index.js, but you can change it to nodemon index.js. All nodemon is it's a runtime tool. It's a development tool that automatically reloads the application whenever a file change has been detected. This is especially useful in development environments where we have to make a lot of changes and we don't want to get involved with always having to restart the application. So nodemon is very convenient in that sense. So this is the application. Now let's go into it and npm start. And as you see here, error handler is not defined, so let's take care of that first. Okay, so the problem here is error handler. And as you saw there, the server automatically restarts and it says it's listening on port 3000. Let's add a space here. And it's restarting, and as you see, the change that we made is automatically updated. So this is a big win of using nodemon. Well, anyway, so we have successfully completed the backend setup for our chatbot application now. So thanks for watching this video, and if you found it helpful, please make sure to like and subscribe. If you have any questions or criticisms, please feel free to leave them in the comment section below. And I'll see you guys in the next video where we go over how to build the front end portion of our application in Angular. So I'll see you then. Bye.